and White Breakdown on ESPN Radio 103.7 and 1450. Sponsored by Joel Confer Toyota and Joel Confer BMW. This is the place to be for news and analysis around Penn State football, basketball, and all 29 other sports. Call the show at 814-272-9625. That's 814-272-9625. Now, here's your hosts of Blue and White Breakdown, Matt Bortner and Zach Sako.
No Zach Sako today, lost his voice, but he'll be back better than ever. Matt Bortner and Jason Lord on Blue and White Breakdown here on ESPN Radio 103.7 and 1450. Give us a call, anything you want to talk about. Man, I don't even know where we start today. There is so much news in the world of Penn State sports. But give us a ring at 814-272-9625. I'll start with recruiting news just because this just broke in the last hour. We got huge news with Cale Sanderson as well that we'll get to right after that. But Marcus Stokes, Penn State's four-star quarterback commit, has flipped to commit to Florida. He was a commitment for Penn State since about, I think, early April. And then on June 22nd, he took a trip for Florida's football camp. And today he announced his decision to flip his recruitment to Florida. Florida guy. I guess he was a Florida fan growing up. Initial reaction here is, yeah, that stinks to lose out on him. It was definitely a luxury picking him up after getting the two quarterbacks in Allar and Prabula. But I think that's also the part you look at here is Penn State is in a pretty good spot quarterback-wise, but you know, the luxury and always having the option of as many talented quarterbacks as possible hurts here for Penn State.
It certainly does. You never want to lose a quarterback commit at all, no matter how strong you are at the position. And I think they're very strong right now as they stand, obviously, having two incoming freshmen that are going to compete right from the get-go. And then you have two very strong, obviously you have a six-year starter and you have a backup that's phenomenal too. But obviously when you lose a quarterback, it's very tough. From Marcus Stokes' perspective, I think he kind of feels probably the same way that a lot of us feel, is when you have the chance to be close to home, you're going to take that chance, and you're going to love that opportunity. And I think that was part of this. Was it all of it? I don't know, but I feel like him getting the chance to play for the team he grew up a fan of, number one, and number two, he's a Florida native. I think that's the biggest thing that I take out of this. It's his chance to play close to home. He even said home is where the heart is, using that old cliche. And I think that's part of it. I really do. I think anytime any of us get that chance to be very close to home or not far from home, we're going to take that opportunity. It's very rare that we don't. And I think that was a major part of him flipping the commit to Florida.
175 nationally, the number 10 overall quarterback and number 35 from Florida. When Penn State got him in April, he seemed to be a guy on the rise at that point. And one thing that we always talk about, James Franklin getting in on a guy at the ground floor. He's really gained some national attention with the Elite 11 camp. He showed out there. So you got to think that also has guys on other schools. Their radar gets bigger for getting a guy like that. And what Zach said to us off air before we went on the show is another good point. Is I'm blanking on the quarterback from Miami that supposedly went for the $11 million, but Florida was supposedly in the race for him as well, and that was, I guess, their asking price, or not asking price, what they offered for that quarterback. So you wonder if they had a boatload of cash to throw out to Stokes here too. So I think there was a multiple layer of factors here. I can't be certain, but from the outside looking in, that's what it would seem like, those two factors together.
Yeah, they did go hard after Jaden Rashada, the quarterback, the guy that took the $11 million from Miami. But I think That's part of what I think the bright side of what we're seeing here with Florida is that competition that we saw maybe 15, 20 years ago that we didn't see for a long time here, is how much competition now there is between Florida, Miami, and also Florida State now a little bit now too. You have those three schools going at it. It seems like the 90s all over again from that perspective. Obviously, there's more at play now, but I think that was a part of it. Yeah, they went after hard at Rashada, didn't get him, and now you bring in Stokes, which is a guy that I think he made a great point with James Franklin, kind of got him at the floor there, and now he's inching closer to a ceiling, which he's nowhere near, but he's inching upward. And I think what I liked about Stokes was his confidence. I think to me, to play quarterback, even when you are a quarterback that has a lot of questions about you, you have to be confident. You have to have a little bit of a cockiness to yourself, and he had that. I think he's got both of that. He's got himself a nickname, or Joker, I think it was, and I think that's kind of the part of playing quarterback. And whether or not Florida threw him a bag of money, I don't know, but then we won't know that. But I think they did go hard after Rashada, obviously, and did not get him, and now they get Stokes. And consistently, Florida has been a school where you need at least one good quarterback. They've consistently rotated quarterbacks. Obviously, they did that with Leak and Tebow many years ago, did that even with Felipe Franks, and now you bring in a guy like Stokes. I think that's a great addition for them. From a Penn State perspective, I think, as you said, it was more the luxury of having him. If you're going to lose a commit, quarterback's not always the best to lose, but in this spot, it's not the worst thing in the world because you have other pieces at the quarterback position that you can build on.
What it does do, so no commits now for Penn State at the quarterback position for 2023. We'll see if there's any other guys Penn State has their eye on or looking to flip another guy now. So that'll be something to keep your eye out on. If they don't get a quarterback in this class, I think it does make it very important in the class of 2024 to get one of your top targets there. But that's still another year away. Also, in this whole conversation, just in general, is Penn State is either getting commits or they're vying for commits in guys in other states. Now they combined 4 guys from Alabama and Florida in the commitments for Penn State for the class of 2023. That was at 5 before Stokes decided to go to Florida because they did just get King Mack, who we'll talk about a little later then too. So I don't know. I just don't think this is some people seemed, and I guess that's the immediate reaction, but it's not the sky is falling here. Penn State did miss out just before we went on air on Cameron Seldon, the athlete from Virginia, 124th player overall. He chose Tennessee. Maryland was also involved there. So not a great day on the recruiting trail for Penn State. We'll get back to football, but I want to bring up, which was huge news yesterday that sort of just crept out of nowhere. We knew Cale Sanderson doesn't want to go anywhere else than Penn State. It's just a matter of ironing out details, especially in the NIL world now, where you don't know if some schools are really putting the pressure up on some of their wrestling programs if somebody would throw out a large cache of money. But Max Ralph of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reported that Sandy Barber, now retired athletic director, said extending Cale Sanderson, who is 43 years old, was not at the top of the to-do list moving forward because it's already been taken care of. Multiple other media outlets confirmed with the university that Sanderson did sign a contract extension. Now, we don't know the details of it, but it seems like Penn State has Sanderson inked up for the long haul here.
Yeah, and that's obviously a great get. You have a coach like Cale. He's built a complete... I mean,
he's the biggest name in
wrestling.
Yeah, wrestling probably in general.
In general, because as a wrestler, what he did, obviously, and now what he's doing as a coach, I think he is the biggest name. And without a doubt, that is going to be the biggest thing for Penn State was getting him. I think he's you always say players coach when it comes to football, basketball. He's the same thing when it comes to a wrestling coach. I think Cael Sanderson, the job he's done here, he's more proud of the guy's accomplishments than he is his own. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He'd be the first to tell you that. And getting him here, I think, was huge. Keeping him here was even bigger. And obviously, it goes without saying, they built a complete juggernaut here. They built a dynasty. You try not to use the word dynasty frequently, but I think
this Alabama football,
this is
UConn
Alabama
women's
football,
basketball,
UConn
UCLA
women's
basketball the years
under Wooden,
past.
absolutely, no doubt about it. And obviously, pro sports.
9 titles in 11 years.
Yeah, 9 titles in 11 years, and the 2 years, they didn't win it. They pretty much accepted the fact it was a rebuilding year and was still in contention one of those 2 years. So I think,
and the other one there was no tournament.
So exactly.
Yeah. Now I don't think they were the favorite. No. They definitely weren't the favorite that year, but still.
All. No, they weren't the favorite at all. Obviously lost the Big Tens that year, but to me, everything that they've been able to accomplish under him, and they just continue to build and build. And this is a great program moving forward. Obviously, the competition is there too, with with Brands getting the extension at Iowa. Obviously.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is so you look, Tim Brands, his contract is out in the open, the 7-year deal, maxing out near the end at $800,000 per year. You got to think that Sanderson's, in terms of length and numbers, is going to be somewhere in the same ballpark, probably money-wise bigger than that. I don't know if it will be because of a big donation somewhere, or if Penn State got this out of their own pocket. But, yeah, the Tom Brands contract probably is more of an indication of where Penn State is headed with this. Penn State only releases the top 25 salaried employees. The list cut off at 662,000. So we'll see next year going forward if Cael Sanderson is above that threshold.
Yeah, obviously, I think that's. I don't think it's a big deal, obviously, publicly, but I don't think it's a huge deal either way. But I think it just shows what kind of person he is, and just what he's been able to do for this program, selfishly, I think, in the big way too. Just he's always put the wrestlers first. He's always put the guys first above him, and he continues to do that. And we'll see, obviously, if he's amongst that list of the top 25 salaried employees. But the job Cael just continues to do here, and I'm anxious to see. Obviously, you guys talked about it, obviously he's only 43 years old, so who knows really where.
I'll say that 20 titles seems like it's a number you throw out there and you're like, man, anybody to get 20 titles, but I almost think that you could even surpass that number if we've seen some of these wrestling coaches, especially the dominant runs you're able to go in that sport. That's obtainable for Cael Sanderson with this deal in place, however long it may be.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's very attainable, and the sky's the limit. I hate to use that cliche, but you look at really what he's been able to do, and it's very attainable. I think there's still, believe it or not, there's still weaknesses on this program. I think you're still kind of looking for that hope.
Yeah.
At 125 that you've been looking for since Sirianni transferred. I think that goes without saying.
Yeah, the middleweights will be a little bit of a question this year, but every good team has some types of question marks everywhere.
Right. Sure, everybody's going to have a weakness. I think there's no question about that when you look at it and what they've been able to have. But yeah, that's obviously what the future holds for this program. And what they've been able to do really just speaks for itself. And everything Cael has done, he's done it the right way, too, which I think has been something that's very important in a lot of ways. And he coaches probably in the toughest conference in wrestling.
No doubt about it.
Yeah, you're going to consistently have. And it's different every year. Obviously, you go back 5 to 10 years, it was Ohio State, Minnesota, Iowa. Now you're talking Michigan. You're talking Nebraska. You're still talking Ohio State and Iowa. Minnesota, I think, depends on what Stevenson's going to do. They may take a step back.
But some of the other schools, you have individual contenders.
You do. Yeah, you certainly do. There's no question about that. You have the individual strength. Michigan, I think, comes to mind right away.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of it. But, what Penn State has done, they've been that consistent team in the Big Ten. And sometimes they have even, I think what Cale does so great that other coaches sometimes don't do. Everybody always has that win first mentality. You want to go undefeated. Cale understands, I think, in a lot of ways, hey, I'm going to wrestle somebody one night that maybe the fans don't want to see wrestle in that spot, where I'm going to do that to save the energy of the other guy. I'm going to do that. I may even sacrifice losing the Big Tens to win the NCAA championship, which he's done. And I think that's a big part of what great coaches can do, and that's what Cale's consistently done.
You're listening to Blue and White Breakdown on ESPN Radio 1037 and 1450, brought to you by Joel Comfort Toyota and BMW, and Joel Comfort Quality Pre-Owned in Pleasant Gap. Shop Joel Comfort Toyota and BMW 24/7 at joelcomfort.com. Coming up next, we have former Penn State defensive lineman Aeneas Hawkins. He will be joining us in studio coming up next here on ESPN Radio 1037 and 1450.
Hey, it's Penn State men's basketball head coach Micah Shrewsbury, and you're listening to Blue and White Breakdown on State College's ESPN Radio.
Back in studio and joined by Aeneas Hawkins, former defensive lineman at Penn State, picking up where we left off before. Glad to have you back in the studio, man.
Thank you guys for having me, man.
What have you been up to since we last spoke?
A whole lot of schoolwork, a whole lot of work with Limitless NIL, doing some podcasting stuff, so trying my best to stay busy.
Yeah, no, we were just talking about graduation coming up here. I remember all the schoolwork days. I know Jason does long ago.
I won't even tell you when I graduate. We can't go there.
But you know, it's probably a bittersweet feeling though when you get to the end of your college career and you're like, man, I don't have to do this schoolwork anymore. But then it's like, it's time for the next chapter of life.
Yeah, no doubt. You when you leave high school, you know, you kind of think you're an adult, you're a man, you get it. But now, kind of leaving college, just like, man, I'm really here now. There's no more playing football, no more schoolwork. All the things I grew up doing every day, they're kind of disappearing.
So yeah, you're the Limitless's NIL's chief athlete officer. Before we had talked about some of the guys you had on board. What about recently? You guys made some new additions to the team?
We've made a couple new additions. We just announced one yesterday that I'm really excited about. Zach Harrison over at OSU.
That.
Obviously playing for, I know we're unrivaled, but that Ohio State, that Big Ten connection there. So finally pairing up teammate with an Ohio State Buckeye, which is weird to say. Not sure how I feel about it, but he's a good dude. Excited about him. We got some other big ones coming down the pipe too.
Yeah, I was going to say, is it sort of weird in talks with, I don't know if you had a relationship with him before, but sort of when you're talking to him and just, I just imagine that had been different dynamic.
Yeah, no doubt. I knew him previously when he was a recruit. Obviously Penn State wanted to nab him. He was a big-time player coming out of high school, and we had that Ohio connection as far as high school football. So knew each other briefly there, but, kind of reconnected. Needed some NIL help. It was a natural fit, but, yeah, definitely a little weird. Not used to talking to Buckeyes during my day.
Well, there has been a lot of news, and especially in the Big Ten. I'm just sort of interested in what you think about USC and UCLA joining. I know I'm more. It's crazy because I guess at 29 years old, I'm not considered old yet, but I'm more of the old-fashioned, I like some of these regional rivalries, and I see what the Big Ten's doing here, and especially when you're talking about expanding your footprint, it's great for the Big Ten, and it gives you more opportunities. I sort of like mixing in those regional rivalries. And I think through every conference there, some of them are getting lost. But in a grand scheme of things, seems like a no-brainer for Penn State to add these two schools.
Yeah, no doubt. I think just
or the Big Ten, not Penn State.
just from a business perspective, I feel like it makes sense. I get it. College football is quickly changing right before our eyes. There's a lot going on. I think it's a good move. I think it'll benefit the Big Ten as a whole long term. But I will say, as a kid growing up in the Midwest, used to the Ohio State-Michigan games and Penn State and those types of that brand of football up here is a little bit different just in terms of how I feel about it. So, it'll be interesting. It's a new look. I like routine, no different than anybody else does, but I also think long term it'll be beneficial.
How much does it hurt to an extent, though, where you now bring in those California teams? Yes, you get the LA market from a Big Ten perspective, but how much does it hurt in terms of travel, especially the other sports? Like you're talking about, a midweek game in Los Angeles where you're flying back with an exam Thursday morning.
Yeah. Just as a former student athlete, it sounds challenging, right? Like that's a lot. Traveling all the way out to LA is a lot different than staying in that Midwest area. It's going to be different. I think it will be challenging for the student athletes, just, with midweek games and then preparing to have exams the next day. It's a lot to manage, and it's not something that people talk about a whole lot.
I would assume that, I guess assumptions aren't right because usually they don't become true and logic doesn't always play out. But I would assume that, especially with some of the other sports that don't work on as big of budgets, that they would probably work something out where you play USC or UCLA in that same stand in I guess 4 or 5 days. But again, I'm not great with telling other people how to use their logic.
Nor am I. And I think when you start talking budgets, that's a little bit above my pay grade. But it makes sense when you say it out loud, no doubt.
I just interested too, like from players' perspective, and even like the friends you have. Not just talking about USC and UCLA. It has to bring up some, excitement though when you get new teams on the schedule. I think it's probably. I'm just speaking from a high school perspective. When you play a new team, I think it adds some juice to
100%.
To the overall feel.
100%. I can recall even last year when we played Auburn, the guys were just naturally more juiced up. It was a team we hadn't played. It was the SEC. It's an excitement factor. Not that what to expect because every year is a different year, but when you're playing Michigan, Ohio State, and those guys, you look forward to that and you anticipate that every year. So having that new team, whether it's a USC or UCLA, or even in these bowl games where you're playing Kentucky and Memphis, it presents a new challenge. And it breaks up that routine of what can be a monotonous season.
Do you think I think really even with USC and I guess both of these, is there going to be a feeling around the Big Ten of when they join, we want to prove to them you didn't just join here and have a cakewalk I don't know. I feel like there has to be an outside perspective to sort of set them straight as well.
Yeah, I can't speak for the whole Big Ten, but I would assume, I know people that think like me too, it's kind of like, hey, you're not walking in here.
Yeah.
This is our show. We run this. So yeah, obviously excited to have USC and UCLA join, but this is competition. We're playing a very barbaric sport by nature, so of course those that competitive spirit is going to show itself.
How much do you look at it now where obviously USC, UCLA coming to the Big Ten, how close are we reaching, and obviously this is much higher than all three of our pay grades by far, but how close do you see it in the sense of, man, we're getting really close to almost just having two super conferences here, where we're having, the Big Ten in one way and then SEC is kind of trying to lure everything away, and then you have that one animal, obviously, that everybody's trying to grab in Notre Dame.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think just looking at the trends, it seems like that's where it's heading. I do think it's above all three of our pay grades. I don't know if it's, to the benefit or to the harm of college football in a big picture sense. Again, I love routine. I love the format and what it has been. But, people had these same types of discussion when the college football playoff committee started and that type of, things are going to change. You anticipate with that with time. So, looking forward to it.
Yeah, talking about change, one of the things that you're obviously very familiar with is that being part of your job is the name, image, and likeness. I'm just sort of curious in terms of what you guys are doing is separate from the collectives out there. So you guys actually are you're an agency. You're working for the betterment of these players, trying to broker them deals. How is sort of the collective? I don't know. Just sort of your thoughts on that, and what has that really done to change up the whole landscape of college football?
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
The best way I could put it, number one, collectives look a lot different at a lot of different places. There's not one uniform collective type of rule or any regulations around that. So, I think you see collectives performing at varying success rates. The collectives here at Penn State have done a great job of putting money in their student athletes' pockets in positive ways that really tie them back into the community. Because I think NIL is better when it impacts everybody around them in a positive way. We can just do brand deals. We can just get you as much money in your pocket if that's what you really want to do. But a part of what we're doing at Limitless NIL and what some of these collectives are doing as well are really trying to empower student athletes to have a greater impact just beyond the field.
And going one further with that, obviously, you look at the last almost 5 to 10 years in college football, the transfer rule has been changed in the sense that you don't have to sit out a year. And now with NIL, do you feel like it has helped or hurt, just being in your shoes as a former player, does it feel like it has helped or hurt the players, and has it helped or hurt the school more with these rule changes where you have the transfer obviously changed in the last 5 to 10 years and now NIL as well?
Yeah, I think the basis and the original intent of things like the transfer portal and things like NIL were indeed to benefit the student athlete. I do think at an NCAA level, on a school-by-school basis, we need to continue to tighten up and really refine some of those things that they can always work out for the benefit of the student athlete, because I don't necessarily think it's always that. I know a bunch of guys who hit the transfer portal and they never get another opportunity, guys who can play football, maybe not at the level of a Penn State or a Big Ten level, but indeed should be scholarship student athletes somewhere. So, really refining it so it makes more sense and everybody benefits from it.
You're listening to Blue and White Breakdown. It's Aeneas Hawkins joining us, former Penn State defensive lineman and Limitless NIL's chief athlete officer. Brought to you by Joel Confer Toyota and BMW and Joel Confer Quality Pre-Owned in Pleasant Gap, your local Toyota dealer for over 41 years, located at 120 East Clinton Avenue behind the Waffle Shop on North Atherton in State College. You want to stick around for another segment?
We're gonna get
a little more topical with some of the Penn State news going on here, but if you want to stick around for one more, so we'll be back on the other side. This is Blue and White Breakdown.
It's time for the play of the game on Blue and White Breakdown.
Long and deep far side, reaches out and juggles, got it, touchdown, Penn State!
All right, this is Curtis Enos. Running loose. There's his speed. Boy, I tell you what, I'm going to go down into my book and come up with 18-wheeler. I mean, he is a thoroughbred. First and goal from the 10. And this is touchdown Enos. There have been a lot of great backs have big days in this ball game. A year ago, it was Eddie George who had a big game as Ohio State won going away. But nobody has ever had a bigger game than this fellow, Curtis Enos.
As we continue to do our flashbacks of memorable plays, memorable moments in Penn State's history, this one's pretty on topic, on brand, as Penn State beat USC 24-7 in the 1996 Kickoff Classic. Curtis Enos runs for 241 yards and 3 touchdowns on 27 carries. He was the first player to ever run for 230 yards or more on USC, and Joe Paterno waited until warm-ups to let Enos, who was the Big Ten Freshman of the Year, know, you know what, you've earned it, you're going to start today.
Wow.
Yeah, he didn't. he didn't play a lot of freshmen, obviously, as you guys know, like growing up, and then when he would do that, like where he would just his press conferences on Tuesday, he wouldn't let anybody know anything.
Yeah.
And then it literally, comes Saturday, okay, here's what we're gonna do, and yeah, Aeneas obviously with the huge game against USC, that was just a memorable season for Penn State. Obviously, couple tough losses. I think Iowa and Wisconsin that year. And
Iowa and Ohio State that year.
They got smoked by Ohio State that year, unfortunately.
They beat Michigan on the road, who I think was a top 10 team.
Yep, got clobbered by Ohio State with Pepe Pearson.
I mean, Curtis Enis was a little bit before me remembering him play. Like, I remember the lore of Curtis Enis, but I think when you go back and look at his highlights and you even look at his stats, I mean, he was All-American.
Yeah.
He might be lost in as being one of the greatest Penn State running backs, and I think some of that has to do with him being suspended in his bowl game his junior year and then going pro.
Him
but
and Vicious both.
I don't know, Aeneas, if you've watched highlights, I mean that the combination of size and speed. Not to the level of Saquon Barkley, but he sort of had some of those traits in him.
He had a lot of those traits, man. He wasn't Saquon from a raw athleticism standpoint, but that dude was special. And the reason I know who he is, because he's before my time, is because my dad, who was playing around that same time, knew all about him and was sure to fill me in.
Yeah, and just like Kajana Carter, his NFL career derailed by injuries. So, but Penn State did finish 11-2. 38-15 win over Texas in the Fiesta Bowl, finished 7th in the rankings. I feel like, too, you don't hear as much about before the struggles in 2000 and after the undefeated team. There were some pretty darn good Penn State teams in between there.
Yeah, that team, number one in '96, beating that Texas team that had Priest Holmes, and obviously that was the team that beat Nebraska in the Big 12 championship that got there. But then the following year they were number one ranked, going into Judgment Day, and obviously the loss to Michigan here. But that was they were two strong teams in '96 and '97. Obviously Enis was a big part of that '97 team. They beat Ohio State that year here at Beaver Stadium, and that was two very memorable seasons. Unfortunately, they had some tough losses. I think that's what made people try to forget those seasons. They were very close to, at that time it was called an Alliance Bowl, because you had Rose, and but obviously lost to Michigan State in East Lansing last game of the year in '97, which was a tough loss. But yeah, those teams were memorable for that reason. They were number one in '97 for a long time. '96, they beat a tough Texas team with James Brown at quarterback, and
man, you're rattling this off the top of your head, man.
Info, man.
You're like at Steve Jones level right now.
Yeah, no, they were good. I remember a lot of those teams very well. Yeah, I definitely remember a lot of those teams, and I think it was if you want to go even further, you talk about before 2000, one game I think Penn State fans remember more than any, and Enis was obviously gone by this point, but that Pigskin Classic with Arizona in 1999, where game day was here. And
LeVar had a really good game.
An unbelievable game. That game was over by halftime. Could have been a lot worse than 41-7.
I think Arizona was top 5 team.
It was number 3 versus number 4.
Yeah,
in that game, and that was just an unbelievable game. And I felt like that was a Penn State team that was a force to be reckoned with. Obviously, Minnesota unfortunately ruined it here, but and then that Brady guy, and the father 2 weeks later,
he tends to win some big games.
How did his career end up?
Came back from 10 down, and I'll never forget my brother saying that he was going to be special. I swear to God, he did. And I just looked at him like he was nuts, because I said he's not even starting quarterback, because Drew Henson was the starter and Scott Dreisbach before him were the starting quarterbacks. So I'm like, he's not going to be in. Sure enough, I wish I would have bet
listen to for everybody out there, listen to your brothers and sisters, your siblings
right.
more
he
often.
He got plenty of other wrong, but he got that one right.
Joined in studio by former Penn State defensive lineman Aeneas Hawkins. Blue and White Breakdown brought to you by Joel Comfort Toyota and BMW, and Joel Comfort Quality Pre-Owned in Pleasant Gap. Rent a Toyota at Joel Comfort Toyota Rent-A-Car, 120 East Clinton Avenue in State College. We sort of mentioned to Aeneas off air in between breaks, is like, you go on Twitter when not only Penn State, anybody's team doesn't have the recruiting day that they want, and you would think the sky is falling.
It's like all over.
Yeah. Now, I know Penn State hasn't had the last 2 seasons that they wanted, but in terms of recruiting, even with the Treyaun Webb decided to go to Florida as well, but it's like it's crazy how different in terms of we look as recruiting as almost as big of a season as the regular season now in college athletics.
Yeah, I mean,
it's always been important, but now you get to see the minds of these kids.
Yep.
You see it play out every day.
You see so much more of it now than you ever have before. You get to know a kid way better. It's much easier as a fan to get connected to the high school kid, the high school recruit who hasn't signed anywhere yet. So I get the disappointment from fans. We know those players that you want don't commit. But I would also say, just on a Penn State level, Coach Franklin's
still the number 5 recruiting class.
Their recruiting classes are monsters. You can see that in the NFL draft every year. Hunter Carson, Kenny Sanders, shout out to you guys, AZ, everybody involved. I mean, Penn State football can recruit now. Go ahead.
And this is something I would say too, and you would know firsthand because you're involved with playing with a lot of those guys. These names that a lot of them are thrown out, the Treyaun Webb, the Marcus Stokes today who decommitted, but you get King Mack this last week from Florida. You get 2 guys from Alabama. I don't know in terms of you being here long enough to see just even the past couple years the expansion geographically and what Penn State's been able to go after.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're recruiting on a national scale. A wide majority of the time. So, they can recruit anywhere they need to. They have built a brand of football. Coach Franklin has built, his identity, and recruits fall in love and believe in it. I can tell you that from experience. I was in the class of 2018. We had Micah Parsons, Pat Fryermuth, and Jahan Dotson in the same group, but we didn't even mention Odafe Owe.
Yeah.
Coach Franklin is gonna land who he needs to land, and they always have a plan over there.
Another interesting recruiting moves, as we mentioned, not a good day for Penn State today, but Tony Rojas moves his decision date from July 5th to July 14th. Tamir Robinson was already scheduled for July 15th. The feeling sort of is that Penn State is the heavy favorites for both of them. I don't know if there's anything to really glean out of him moving his day back other than, it'd be pretty cool if you got 2 of those edge rushers on back-to-back dates.
That would be really cool. Recruitment and commitment dates get pushed back for anything under the sun. I pushed my commitment back twice because I didn't have a producer for my commitment video. Which, in hindsight, as a 22-year-old man, so silly. What are we doing here? But that's the day and age we live in. It could be anything, but it would be cool to land both those kids back-to-back for sure.
That really interesting there on his decision to move back because, again, we're talking about, the so-called bad day, the sky is falling, but you look at guys on the list, I mean, I think Penn State still has a chance to land a top 5 class here, Jason.
Oh, very much so. I think they're in great shape right now. Obviously, the losses they had here, I think, to me, yes, in the class of 2023, they weren't strong at that position. In the class prior, they were strong at that position, and I think they're going to be strong going forward at those positions. So I think that's going to help them a lot. So, I think even in 2023 as a whole, everything they've been able to get, they've addressed needs, I think, first and foremost, and right now they have a very strong class with the potential to make it even stronger with the guys you just said. Obviously Rojas being a big recruit, and then Robinson being in the home state, I think is going to help a lot too. And both of them making their decision. As Tom Petty says it the best, the waiting's the hardest part. I guess we got to wait now a couple days.
Yeah, there's some decision dates out there. Derek LeBlanc from Florida, he's the teammate of Jakeem Jackson from Florida. That they're making their decisions on the same date. Penn State is in the running for both of them. Landon Montgomery, the running back from Scranton, I would almost peg him to be a Nittany Lion now that they didn't get Treyaun Webb. He may have still came here if Penn State landed Webb, but there's a lot to like out of Landon Montgomery. I know Zach, he was saying that, there's aspects of him that he thinks he likes better than Webb. So Evan Link is another big name out there to watch, the 4-star from Gonzaga High School, the same high school as Miles Dredd.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Your
sir.
buddy Miles
My
Dredd.
guy, Miles Dredd.
Who is back again. So I think that'll be interesting because you see Penn State shift over here to Penn State basketball. I don't know how much you follow the other Penn State sports, but Butler is named to be on their schedule. With the young talent they have, I imagine it's pretty exciting for Penn State basketball fans too. We've talked about it a lot here, but you're friends with Miles Dredd.
Yeah.
What is his sort of feeling this year?
Yeah, no, he's I mean, it's funny because there's a lot of crossover between the sports. Whether it's women's, men's, the mentalities are always the same. Miles Dredd is a competitor by nature. He doesn't get enough credit for it from the fans, from the community, from everybody. That is his MO. Knowing him personally, his mentality is outstanding. So they're just ready to compete. You know, guys like him, Seth Lundy, they're excited to prove what they can do this year. They have a tremendous belief in Coach Shrews. Really excited about him, so I think they'll have a good year.
Yeah, so Butler, the obvious connections there, Shrewsbury, assistant coach there. The others on the schedule now are, you got the Charleston Classic with Virginia Tech, South Carolina, Davidson. They're a part of that. You have the matchup at Clemson. Also, I don't know about what's your wrestling. How much wrestling background you have? That's, I mean, huge news with Cale Sanderson.
Yeah, big time. I was not huge into wrestling before I got here, but I've lived with PJ Mustafa for the last 2 years, and that is all we watch during wrestling season. So I am very familiar with college wrestling now. And Penn State, what Coach Sanderson has done.
Say, PJ Mustafa had to have been about, the scariest high school wrestler to ever go up against.
Goodness gracious. I'll tell you what, I wrestled PJ one time, and I'll never make that mistake again. He is too gifted. You can't do anything with him.
You're right. One time is enough to you take your beating, and you're like,
that's it. That's it. No more.
Well, Aeneas, can't thank you enough for joining. I'm sure we'll talk to you again down the road, but best of luck with everything.
Thank you again for having me, guys. Had a good time.
All right, listening to Blue and White Breakdown on State College's ESPN Radio 103.7 and 1450.
This is Blue and White Breakdown on ESPN Radio 103.7 and 1450. It's now time to look across the conference and see where Penn State stands in the Big Ten. Across the Conference is sponsored by Happy Valley Adventure Bureau. You don't need to leave Happy Valley for a great getaway. Plan your staycation today. Visit the Happy Valley Adventure Bureau for day trip ideas.
Really fun having Aeneas Hawkins in the studio. We heard a little bit of the players' perspective in terms of the newest additions to the Big Ten. The USC and UCLA coming in on what I'm assuming in 2024, when you're going to hear here shortly, whenever the Big Ten's media rights, their contract comes out. I mean, there was evaluations of $1.1 billion before USC and UCLA joined. I would, I would have to say at least 1.5 to 1.6. I mean, the whole state of California, that has to be a major raise in terms of that evaluation, and that's what the Big Ten did here. They're not just expanding to expand. They brought two teams in that bring money to the table to help everybody else in the conference.
Yeah, especially, and I hate to say UCLA is that stepchild, but USC I think is the big name without a doubt. Obviously,
I mean, that's the crown jewel.
Yeah, the crown jewel. Obviously, both have that Los Angeles background. Pasadena with USC or with UCLA, excuse me. Obviously, so you have that chance, obviously, to play in the Rose Bowl before you at times too now. But with USC, I think you got them when they are just scratching the surface from a perspective of the money they can bring in, because obviously bringing in Lincoln Riley is huge, and now I think they're going to be probably, in my opinion, at least a top 10 program very soon for a number of years. I just think they're in a perfect spot. Yeah.
When you're talking about schools that benefit from NIL,
absolutely.
USC is near the top of the list.
No question about it. The location is huge with them, and And Riley's a great coach. I don't think you can overlook that. So I think in the history that USC has, even prior to the Pete Carroll days, the history that they had, obviously with O.J. Simpson, I hate to say the name, but and Marcus Allen and there, but you had so much greatness there, and now you have that chance to build off of that. And I think one thing that's kind of not talked about, though, and obviously this has nothing to do with financials, we always joked about, and this was back when you talked about when the Florida schools were good in the 90s, how much it would be interesting for them to come here in November and witness that weather. Now you have USC, UCLA maybe trying to do that too. Will they walk into that tunnel and say,
Madison, Wisconsin, snowing in November?
Minnesota.
The other thing I saw flying around there is their reaction when they see 3 tight ends out on the field.
That too. That too, but yeah.
Yeah, that is a real interesting part about this, because that is... obviously they'll become more accustomed to it, but that's not going to be their everyday lifestyle. So we'll see how that plays out. Also, another thing why I'm so big on home field advantage in the first round of the college football playoff if they expand is because if some of these teams from down south or the West Coast have to come up for a home game. It's different that time of the year.
It sure is, and I think that's going to be the good part, I think, of what we are seeing. I do think we're kind of reaching the point. We brought it up to obviously to Aeneas. I think we are kind of getting to the close of that super conference era.
Notre Dame's going to have to make a move here now.
Yeah, and they're going to go where the money is. I think that's the biggest thing.
I would think the Big Ten makes the most sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's.
I would like to stick it to Notre Dame and say, stay out. We don't. But they bring too much to the table.
They do, and that's. You look at the first team any big bowl is going to take. It's going to be Notre Dame. That will always be, and they will, as long as they possibly can, keep that TV deal, the individual TV deal they have, and keep away from everybody else because they want to stay independent. They want to keep the money. But
with them aligning the ACC, if Clemson and Florida State jump ship,
100%.
If that keeps you out of college football playoff, that's the final determining factor that gets Notre Dame to move.
Yeah, because your recruiting class is going to be a lot better with Freeman. I think he's a great recruiter.
I think they end up with the #1 recruiting class this year.
And I think Notre Dame is only going to get better. They have beefed up their non-conference schedule. They've done a great job with it, but it's not enough. You have to be in a conference at this point because championship Saturday / Friday, whatever night either team plays, that's, I think, been so critical when it comes to the college football playoff now. And I think that's a big reason why Notre Dame has been left out at times, but also been 4-seeded at times too, because you just haven't shown enough, despite the fact you beat Clemson the year in South Bend and then you got thumped, obviously. But and then you played Georgia the one year, now you have Ohio State this year. It's just not enough, even though you have beefed up the schedule. I give them credit for that. Yeah, they're going to have to join a conference. I agree with you entirely.
Well, and I think it's interesting. Obviously, football's the big driver here. That's the big money move. But these teams do bring a lot of prestige in a lot of other sports, so I think that is a good fit that way. 2 great basketball schools of recent, so that adds to your conference as well. But again, I just worry, and in general, the whole college athletics, the regional part of football, and I'm all for going to get the best non-conference schedules possible, but I'm just afraid the rivalry aspect of college athletics just isn't where it used to be, especially for football.
No, it certainly isn't. You've lost a lot of those rivalries now. You go back even back in the day, Nebraska and Oklahoma, they don't really play anymore. Texas and A&M, absolutely. Same thing. Fortunately, we still have Ohio State, Michigan, but you've lost a lot of that. I think that's a great point. You're absolutely right on.
Well, the football head-to-head records, Penn State with these 2 teams, Penn State actually trails in all of these. USC was 6-4 head-to-head over Penn State, and UCLA is 4-2 over Penn State. My final thoughts on the way out, I just want to say, too, that not the day Penn State won in recruiting, but those guys aren't the difference between there's just those couple guys between the win and loss record for Penn State coming up. A lot of it, they have done their work already in the recruiting field that a lot of it now comes to, can they get it done on the field? That's sort of how I see it.
Yeah, I've always said recruiting's not an exact science. It comes down to what you produce on the field.